your cameras off. Thank you very much, Federica, for that. And your image will not be recorded. The recorded, in fact, will be shared at the CoARA's YouTube channel. What else? Yeah, so slides and also the recorded will be shared with all the participants. And that's it, I think. So we can, yeah, we'll open, as I was mentioning in the Q&A, the floor for questions that you can send them or by chat or also raising your hand, the virtual hand. So yes, let's start or continue with some details on the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment, CoARA. I'm pretty sure you already know it, but in case you don't, the CoARA coalition was created in December 2022. And in fact, it's been like a building process for more than 2 years and even more with previous initiatives like the DORA San Francisco Declaration, also the Leiden Manifesto, with this idea of the need for research assessment reform. The CoARA and this agreement you have here in the screen, and all the organizations that were working on this agreement agreed in shared principles for the reform, also 10 commitments, and also frame time, because what it is very important that CoARA is a call for action. It wants to go beyond the declarations and also push us as organizations to make a step ahead. So you have the full agreement text in the CoARA website. If you go to the next slide, Rita, please. Yeah, so currently this is the CoARA members by type of organizations. As you can see in your screen, we are right now around 650 organizations around the globe, but most of them in Europe. But there are more signatories of the agreement. Most of these organizations are research performing organizations, so both universities and also research center, although we also have academies, learned societies, and associations of researchers, which are also very important for the work to be done. As well, another actor that is also present in the CoARA, among the CoARA members, are public and private research funding organizations and also their association. And also a very relevant type of organizations are the non-for-profit organizations involved in research assessment. If we go to the next slide, we will see that the CoARA membership by country is somehow heterogeneous, but there are some countries that are big countries like Spain, Italy, Poland, and France that have a lot of universities, for instance. But you can see this distribution. Maybe going to the next slide, what we can also see is that CoARA has been made in an effort in order to go global and not just staying here in Europe, but also spreading the word for this reform globally. And here you can see the distribution where the organizations that are already members of CoARA are. Yeah, next slide. So in order to move on and to go in this reform, to also to be more concrete, CoARA has organized its activities in working groups and also in national chapters. So for the working groups, there are 13 working groups for the moment. This is a webinar of one of those working groups, the Reforming Academic Career Assessment. But as you can see in the slide, you can see there are many different topics and issues that are being tackled by those working groups. And if you want more detail, you can find it out at the CoARA website. There are also national chapters in CoARA because there are specific specificities at the national level. So for the moment, there are 15 national chapters across Europe. Here you can see the countries. And also the discussion is being organized at this national level, but also across those national chapters. And if you go to the next slide, Britta, thank you. So talking about our working group on reforming academic career assessment, when we decided to organize this group, it was because we wanted to go beyond this reform of the research assessment. And as the research is also being done at universities, we thought that it was also very important to think about the academic career assessment at large, not just on the research, but also on the other activities at the academia, as the academia is performing. So for this group, what we think that academic career assessment system should adequately reflect the different tasks, function, and also the roles of the academics we are fulfilling over the course of our career. So this idea of this working group is to broaden this reflection on the research assessment, as I said, to an academic career assessment. If you go to the next slide. So we are a big working group with 39 members from 21 countries, both in Europe and also beyond Europe. As you can see, most of us are coming from a university or a university association and network, but we also have a network of research center, also other organizations involved in research assessment. Very importantly, we also have learning societies and associations of researchers, so not just covering the institutional side, but also the individual part with these associations. And we also have national authorities, like the Italian Agency for the Evaluation of Universities and Research Centers. Next slide, Rita. Thank you. So our general objectives is first to define the principles of what a reform of the academic career assessment should be from the perspective of institutions, but also the academic staff. And second, to develop an adaptable toolbox for academic career assessment, considering all the university missions, also a broad scope of activities and skills and competencies of the academic staff at the different stages of their career. Next slide. So we have the working group's activities are for 2 years, and we decided to divide it in 2 phases. The first phase is the one we are currently in. We are developing a mapping of the initiatives at institutional and national level, the main initiatives on the academic career assessment reform that are going on. And we want to make that mapping considering the outcomes, but also the benefits and the challenges, and identifying key elements that can be used in different contexts, and maybe scale them up at a supranational level. So here is the phase where we are, and we launched in March a survey that you will see the results later on, but also we've been working on case studies that we are analyzing right now in order to make a synthesis and a good analysis of the lessons learned from all those 2 different inputs, but also with the discussions we are having, like the one in the meeting today. After these lessons learned and all these analyses, what we wanted to start developing this toolbox. We are sure that we will have several iterations there, and the idea is for sure to share everything openly with not just CoARA members, but also openly with everybody. If you go to the next slide, Rita. Yeah, so that's it for the overview, and now I think we can start with the study cases that it was planned. And for the study cases, we have here Mira Soderman. Mira, are you here?
Yes, hello.
Thank you now. Thank you very much. So Mira, thank you very much for joining. Mira is coordinator for responsible assessment at the Federation of Finnish Learned Societies. She coordinates the work of the Finnish National CoARA chapter and also the steering group and working group on responsible research assessment in Finland. And Mira is going to present us a case study. So Mira, thank you very much for joining, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pastora, for the kind introduction and for organizing this webinar. So I think we can start with the first slide. Thanks. So something general about these case studies that we conducted. Well, the survey, which will be presented later, it focuses on the institutional and organizational level initiatives. The case studies describe well-established international and national level initiatives for reforming research assessment. And the initiatives to be included in the case studies collection must have an implementation plan targeted at all organizations conducting academic career assessment, meaning recruitment, performance evaluation, and or career progression evaluations within a country, meaning at the national level or irrespective of country, so also international initiatives. They also must have some public documentation of the initiatives, which can be in any language. However, in our case study template, they had to be described in English. And we used a case study template to describe these initiatives in a structured and comparable way. And we have 11 case study drafts. 7 of them were selected by the team and 4 suggested by our working group partners. So these were the kind of general remarks. May I have the next slide, please? Thanks. Here you can see the list of the initiatives that we included. The name of the initiative, the year that it was launched, the geographical scope refers here to the kind of like primary geographical scope of application, and also the authors, the cases. So you can see that we had nice case studies from all over the Europe, Latin America, Caribbean, and also global initiatives here. May I have the next slide? Thanks. And here we have the template that we used to describe the cases. These case study drafts were between 5 and 10 pages long. And this was the kind of structured template that we used, and the points that we wanted to be highlighted from these initiatives and cases. And the template was first tested with cases from Finland, Norway, and the Netherlands to see how it works, and then we elaborated it a bit, and this was the final template then that we used. May I have this next slide? Thanks. Here we have the one example of those case studies in a very condensed form, of course. This is a very nice example, I think, because here you can see many, or it aligns very nicely with the research assessment reform objectives and also the CoARA commitments. You can see, for example, how it recognizes the diversity of research work, outputs, activities, and practices. It emphasizes the diversification of research careers and roles, takes into account both quantitative and qualitative elements in a balanced manner, which was an element that was repeated also in other case studies. It values mobility as a way to improve the professional development of researchers. And in a nutshell, it captures very well and very nicely the reform agenda. So this is an example of one of the case studies. Thanks. And here we have the toolkits. We also asked in the template if there are some specific tools that the initiatives have promoted, and here's a short list of them. These tools highlight how the initiatives have tackled different challenges. They include, for example, matrices such as the Norwegian career assessment matrix, the so-called NORCAM. We have templates such as narrative CVs, structured CV templates, instructions, for example, frequently asked questions, reports, guidelines, best practice examples, for example, case studies, participation platforms, and also self-assessment tools. So it's a very broad range of different kind of tools to support responsible research assessment. And maybe it can be highlighted that even though many of the initiatives were designed with an eye to the national context, it was highlighted in the studies that they are also, that many of the tools and the initiatives are also generic enough to be adapted to other local or national or also international contexts. May I have the next slide? Thanks. And here, just some key takeaways from the studies, something that we found worthwhile to highlight. So one of them concerns the recommendations regarding qualitative and quantitative assessment. We can say that based on the case studies, practically all initiatives prioritize qualitative assessment, which is supported by responsible use of quantitative indicators. So very much in line with the CoARA commitments. Here we can see some of the tools related to qualitative assessment. I already talked about narrative CV, short narratives, structured CV, templates, portfolios, etc. And however, it was also like highlighted or emphasized that the qualitative assessment can be supported with responsible use of quantitative indicators. So they are not completely abandoned, but the key word is their responsible use. And then, of course, it's like it's important to have a common understanding about what responsible use of indicators means. And this case study also included some different means to tackle this issue. We had, for example, recommendations for responsible use of metrics, list of accepted indicators, narrative bibliometrics, and so forth. So this was like a common thread through all our case studies. May I have the next slide, please? Okay, and another point to highlight was concerned the intersectorality. which means how the initiative recognizes and supports the consideration of intersectorality, meaning movement, for example, from academia to industry, private sector, public institution, and vice versa. And practically all initiatives recognized the value of intersectorality. There were some identified benefits in relation to that, for example, the knowledge transfer, valorization, recognition of the often unacknowledged roles and contributions, influence on policy and practice, diversification of career paths, for example. The case studies also highlighted some ways or means to support intersectoral mobility. However, they were probably fewer than the tools related to, for example, narrative CVs or structured CV templates. But some of the means that were mentioned that support this were collaborative research projects, secondment in other sectors, stakeholder engagement trainings, and also initiatives to promote better recognition of the often acknowledged roles and contributions. But this is perhaps also something that or since there is a strong motivation to reform research assessment toward a more holistic recognition of competencies and roles. So this is perhaps also an issue that deserves more attention and perhaps also more experimentations and exchange of good practices, how to properly support it. And may I have the next slide, please? Thanks. And then we identified from the case studies we asked the case studies to identify some challenges and benefits which are identified by the initiatives. So if I start with the challenges, so one of the challenges that was mentioned often was the culture change related to academic assessment. It was highlighted that both the senior and early career researchers have to adapt to the new system. It was some case studies especially highlighted the fact that the early career researchers often have to kind of navigate in a changing system with perhaps blurred career prospects, and then on the other hand there are probably senior academics that do not think that this is a very strong priority. So the culture change is always a difficult thing. Then the variation in implementation policies was mentioned. On the one hand, it was stressed that the assessment has to be mindful to the context, but on the other hand, the variation of the implementations policies or the kind of like fragmentation was seen as a potential obstacle. Then the lack of established models and standards was one issue raised, and also the documentation, that how do we properly document the merits and competencies of researchers, and also the resources. We know that assessment processes, when done truly, may be burdensome, time-consuming. There is also the availability of reviewers is also an issue to tackle. Then some benefits identified with the reform. What almost all the initiatives highlighted was that the initiatives have kind of formed the groundwork for their research assessment reform in general, and the joint effort was seen as a very, very important thing. Then obviously the wider recognition of contributions and roles was seen as something very welcome and something that that is to be embraced. Then that the reform might also kind of facilitate the movement between disciplines and sectors, and also the initiatives encourage to this. And then finally, the improvement of academic culture in terms of inclusiveness, diversity, transparency, and the quality of research in general. So I think that was it in a nutshell.
Thank you very much, Mira. Thank you for sharing these takeaways and the work you've been doing very hard in this working group, compiling first and then analyzing those case studies. And thank you very much. So as I was mentioning in my introduction, we want to open the debate with other people that are not part of our working group. And for that, just for starting this discussion, we've invited two speakers who will comment on the case studies first and then the survey. So I will give first the floor to Professor Jeannie Barbour. She is currently co-chair of DORA, of the Declaration on Research Assessment. She's also editor-in-chief of the Medical Journal of Australia and professor at Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, Australia. And she was previously director of Open Access Australasia. She's a medicine by training, and then she did her PhD at Oxford University and postdoctoral research in the US on globin gene regulation. And she's been involved in many international initiatives on open access, innovative scholarly communication and publication, and also research integrity initiatives, including the final drafting of the UNESCO Open Science Recommendation in 2021. Jeannie, I know you're there. I know it's late in Australia, so good evening, and thanks for joining us. So the floor is yours. I cannot see you right now, but I know you're there.
Definitely here. Hi there.
Yes.
Thanks, Pastora. Hello, everybody. I'm in beautiful Sydney in Australia, which is, for those of you who know it, it's on the east coast of Australia. It's on the lands of the Gadigal people, the Eora Nation, a very beautiful and cold place at the moment. So hello, everybody. It's great to be here. So I'm pleased to be speaking, really kind of giving the perspective from DORA, Declaration on Research Assessment, which I know many of you will be familiar with. And that's we're a small organisation. I'm one of the co-chairs. Kelly Coby at the University of Ottawa is my other co-chair. Rebecca Lawrence is our vice chair, and we have dedicated staff and an international steering committee of 24 members from across 12 countries. So international, like CoARA is. So I just want to say first off, congratulations to CoARA and to the group for putting together all of the case studies and the survey. It's a really important baseline work, and I think it kind of sets the stage for what needs to happen next. I'm going to talk briefly about some of the features of the DORA case study. I would really encourage you to look at them all. They're very comprehensive and have really interesting perspectives overall. And then I'll reflect on the case studies together. So I will just say the first thing about the DORA one was that it reinforces the fact that the declaration was a catalyst for the global initiative that DORA has become, and also I think sets the stage for the work that CoARA is doing. What's really interesting to me is that we now have 25,000 signers of DORA. So that indicates that as well as the institutional support, which, for example, CoARA has very much focused on, we have a very diverse community of individual signers. So this is something that I think is incredibly important from the academic point of view. And I think what's really interesting from the work that's being done here is getting that academic perspective in. And I think having that in shaping the next stages of research assessment is absolutely critical. like many of the case studies that have been highlighted, our work most recently highlights practical tools for implementation. So Mira highlighted some of the toolkits that not just that we have done, but also other organisations have done. We have documentations of case studies. It's very important, I think, to be able to show organisations, what is happening in other institutions, to give them some ideas and sort of, I guess, some reinforce that they're not alone in that. And Reformscape, which is our new database of institutional practices, is increasingly collecting those globally. And I think one of the things that I think is particularly interesting is encouraging different ways of thinking that address biases in the system. And that is something that, again, we come up again, and I heard that when Mira was talking about it, this idea that, we've always done things the way we're always going to do them. So how do we change that narrative? And that is something that DORA has some very practical tools on, and which I think are really helpful in thinking through some of the issues we're all trying to address. I would just say that, like many organisations, we work internationally, and we have made specific work with supporting diversity in the system. And again, it's pleasing to see that reflected in the case studies. I think it's an absolute recommendation that diversity in thinking about research assessment strengthens what we all do, and it will lead to a better system. Our target audience is really everybody within the academic sector. We know that we need a systems approach, because that is what it ultimately will lead to a culture change. That's absolutely critical when we're thinking about academic career assessment is here. So just with regard to the case studies overall, what struck me, as Mira said, was that there was a concordance of priorities identified across the international and national initiatives in these case studies, and recognised for practical tools to support assessment reform. It's very good to see, for example, there is a universal acknowledgement of the need to move away from, or at least be very cautious and use indicators responsibly, and to support qualitative measures of assessment such as narrative CVs. It struck me that the diversity in number of initiatives is a strength. It can seem like there's a lot going on, but actually I think that is an absolute strength. And I would note especially that the overarching international organisations like DORA, like CoARA, are entirely complementary, I think, to each other and to the national initiatives. And it's very important, I think, that those initiatives learn from each other in both directions. And then finally, I would just say my final observation is that it's just delightful to see that a number of these initiatives reinforce and emphasise the relationship between open science and research assessment, which I think is a very positive move. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Yini, for your first reactions, and yeah, thank you very much for this last point on the open science movement and how it interconnects with this research assessment movement from the UA. We've been also pushing for that from our open science expert group, so thanks for that. And thanks for your first comment. So now we'll move to Maria Pietila. Hi, Maria. Maria is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Eastern Finland and project researcher at the Federation of Finnish Learned Societies. Maria holds a PhD in political science from University of Helsinki, and her research interests include academic careers, research assessment, science policy, gender equality, and diversity in academia, as well as the societal impact of research. So Maria, we are eager to hear from you, from your side, your comment and first reactions.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. First of all, I also appreciate the efforts of the working group. So congratulations on producing the insights you are presenting today. And thank you to the organizers for the opportunity to share some reflections based on the cases described. So first, it is good, I think, also that organizations work on this topic together, both at international and national levels. I think collective work is important to enable researcher mobility, for example. My own university has benefited from the fruitful collaboration within the UFE University Alliance and the Jeroen University Network. And I think it's also important to acknowledge national level nuances and to learn from each other. So in my view, research assessment reform is not just about changing the assessment criteria, but also about changing the valuations behind the criteria. So what kinds of contributions we as academics and universities as collective entities should be making in society. So of course, changing values takes time, and reforming academic career assessment will be a long process, which requires discussion and involvement from many parties. So I'm particularly happy to hear that there are many researchers here today, as I think they are key players in many academic processes, such as reviewing funding applications and integrating younger colleagues into the scholarly community. In my view, researchers' knowledge of required skills and competencies will also strengthen the information needed to drive the reform forward. In Finland, the Working Group on Responsible Research Assessment conducted a survey targeting researchers from all fields, career stages, and organizational settings. So we wanted to know what outputs and activities researchers themselves think should be valued in assessments. So we should make sure we use such knowledge in the reform process. My background is in political science and public administration. So while I was looking at the cases, I was thinking what kinds of policy instrument these cases represent. And according to my understanding, many of the cases are kind of capacity building instruments that aim to provide resources, knowledge, and support to different actors. While this is, of course, valuable, the effectiveness of such programs and initiatives may be constrained without mandatory measures for organizations such as with binding legislation. So, for instance, related to DORA, there is a risk that some organizations may express commitment to DORA principles without actual organizational change. And I think this kind of window dressing activity is also a potential risk in CoARA, as organizations may sometimes have pressures to be involved in the reform process, even if there is sometimes a lack of willingness to take substantial action. So universities often respond when funding is involved. So I think it is important to consider also national level incentives and change them if needed. So we need to ask what material incentives and barriers different universities in different national settings have to change the way researchers are assessed to further accelerate the reform. And well, of course, universities are typically very large organizations. So even if there was top-level willingness to make changes, internal communication about these guidelines, tools, frameworks, etc., may be a challenge. So, for example, academic recruitment processes are complex and involve many actors. It might sometimes be that the people at the grassroots level involved in these processes have never heard of the good recommendations. So I think this kind of communication and monitoring aspect is a tricky one for universities when implementing the reform. And last point, from the early career researcher's perspective, I think it is very encouraging that many of the cases you have described don't focus solely on assessments. In my view, it is important not to put all our energy into assessment issues, although they are very important, but also to address the precarity of careers, improve work conditions, and provide career guidance both for academic and non-academic career paths. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for your comments, Maria, and maybe Mira or Ginny want to react on that. I will open also the floor for some questions from the audience. Just remember that we will make the broad discussion at the end of the next part, but if you have some comments or aclaratory questions, please raise your hand or just put them in the chat. Ginny, Mira, do you have some, or even Maria, you had something to react on that? Ginny, go ahead. Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to reinforce Maria's point about the kind of the precarity of of early career researchers, and I think that one of the things that also came across is the need for in assessing early career career assessment is this idea of being able to change between fields is really problematic now with the current system. And I think what one of the things that was good from these case studies was to see the recognition of the need to support movement amongst researchers. So I think that's just a really important point to emphasize.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ginny. Yeah, also this idea of the different levels, no, but international, but also at the national level in order to promote these incentives and changes. Yeah, at the multi-level scale. I cannot see any question on the chat. Mira, if you want to say something else, and if not, we're gonna move to the survey. Okay, so
I think we can move to the survey. Sure.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. So we'll move to the survey, and now I'm gonna introduce Rita Moraes from the EUA. She is part of the working group, and let me take this opportunity to thank again, as many times as I can, the amazing work that the EUA Secretariat is doing, organizing, coordinating, and doing the hard part of the work of this working group at CoARA. So Rita, but also Vincent Gaillard and Federica Garbulia are there answering your questions in the chat. Thank you very much for that. Rita, now is your turn. Rita Moraes is advisor for research and innovation at the EUA. Her main areas of activity cover research assessment, academic careers, and also open science. She holds a PhD in social psychology from the University Institute in Lisbon. And now, Rita, the floor is yours.
Thank you,
for
Pastora.
the results of the survey. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. I hope you can see the slides and hear me well. Yes. So thank you. And we will present you today some selected results of the survey. So we are still analyzing some data, but we bring you here today already a comprehensive view of the results. So before we dive into the results, just a little bit of background information on the survey. So as Pastora and Mira already said, so the survey focused on institutional and organizational level initiatives on reforming academic career assessment. The working group developed the draft at the end of last year. We had a pilot phase early in January with institutions from different countries, and this included universities, but also research organizations, which were the main target groups of the survey. We made some adjustments to the survey after the pilot, and then finally we launched the final version in February, and the data collection ran until early April. So the main aims of the survey were then to collect information on these organizational level initiatives that aim to broaden the criteria and methods for evaluating the outputs and impacts of academic activities for the recruitment, performance evaluation, and career progression of academic staff. The survey was open to research organizations and universities worldwide. They did not need to be CoARA members to participate, and there were also no geographical restrictions. We were trying to, or the eligible organizations to participate in the survey were those that were planning, initiating, or already implementing some reform process on academic career assessment, either at the level of the organization or at departmental level. So in terms of the content of the survey, we had, of course, open and closed-ended questions, and we tried to gather like a comprehensive view of the reforms being implemented. So we had questions on the challenges of current academic career assessment systems, motivations for change, drivers, the role of academic staff and the organizational leadership, also the importance of different academic activities in the assessment, and how organizations were communicating internally on these reforms. So in the end, we ended up with 236 valid responses. These are independent organizations from 41 countries. As you can see from the distribution, so most of the respondents, they come from continental Europe. We have a few respondents from other world regions, which you have there highlighted in blue. And the countries where we had more respondents were Spain, France, Georgia, and Germany. So important to say that all the results you will see today, they aggregate all the respondents. So there are no cross-country comparisons, because even though we have countries with a little bit of a larger sample, these are still, of course, not representative of the size of the system in these countries. Also important to mention at this point that, as I've said before, so these are independent organizations, so we only accepted one response per organization, and the people replying to the survey tended to be in higher level leadership positions in the organization for the most part. So in terms of the profile of the organizations that replied to the survey, most were comprehensive universities, and about 15% of research organizations, and a little bit less of specialized or technical universities. The vast majority were public organizations, focusing both on research and teaching, and a large part of the sample, so about 43%, these were large organizations, so having 1,000 or over 1,000 research staff as FTEs. 62% of these are CoARA members, and 28% indicated that they had signed DORA. So in terms of the involvement of reforms, we had a question in the survey, and so one of the early questions asking if organizations were planning, initiating, or implementing a reform process. The vast majority indicated that they were. 18% said no. And then for these organizations, we asked them about the reasons that they could identify for not being engaged on a reform process. And you have here the reasons they identified, from the most frequent to less frequent. So many of them mentioned national regulations and more limited autonomy from the institutions to define ACA reforms. Some of them also said that they were not aware why the organization was not engaging in reforms. They mentioned resource capacity constraints, the fact that reforms had been recently implemented, and so they were trying to assess its effectiveness before moving ahead with other reforms. And then the other factors were more rarely mentioned. So important to say at this point that for the organizations that said no to this question, they had this follow-up question for the reasons, but then the survey ended for them. And only those that said yes, so that they were in some stage of planning, initiating, or already implementing reform, then they moved forward with the survey. So all the results you will see from now on, they focus on these 82%, which represents 192 organizations. So for these organizations that were engaged in some reform process, we've asked them about the stage in which they were at the time. And the majority of them, here in green, they said that they were discussing about these processes, or they were planning them, but they had not started implementation yet. We had about 11% that said that these processes, these reforms were already fully implemented, and 27 saying that there was implementation was going on, either a pilot or full implementation. So we also included a question asking at which level the processes for academic career assessment were developed and implemented. And this was a multiple choice question, so they could take several options. In terms of the development, most universities and research organizations, they said that ACA processes were developed at the level of the institution and then followed by the national level. And then in terms of the implementation, most of them also said that the implementation was mostly done at the level of institution, followed by the departmental level, and implementation at national level, this was less frequent. We've asked these organizations if they could identify the main challenges in current ACA systems for them. So this was an open question. And then we've tried to, analyze the responses and, aggregate them in different topics and cluster them in these different thematic areas, which you have here presented again from the most frequent to the least frequently cited. So the main challenge identified by most organizations were concerns about the incomplete evaluation scope of academic contributions, so particularly the neglect of non-traditional elements such as teaching, leadership, or soft skills. Also, the over-reliance on quantitative metrics, namely the GIF, for example, which often undervalues teaching in favor of research. Then organizations also identified a series of items that contributed to the complexity of the assessment process. And this included, for example, challenges in transitioning to new systems, how to balance qualitative and quantitative methods, how to address lengthy evaluation procedures, difficulty in defining impact, excellence, or quality across disciplines, how to evaluate interdisciplinary work, how to ensure transparency, and how to manage peer review processes, which also added further complexity. Then other challenges that organizations mentioned included limitations imposed by centralized systems or national regulations, the complexity and slow pace of accreditation processes, limited financial resources, which many times hinder training, qualitative assessments, or career support. And some also mentioned that there is an absence of automated reporting systems. They have also mentioned two additional challenges. So here, the discrepancy in assessment criteria and procedures inside institutions or then across the national level. And finally, challenges in attracting and retaining talent, especially from diverse and international backgrounds, dealing with bureaucratic hurdles, the need to accommodate diverse career paths and stages, and also challenges related to internationalization, so competition, ensuring quality, mobility constraints were also mentioned. So in terms of what were the main drivers for the reform, so who initiated the reforms, let's look first here to the left. So in general, overall for the sample, most organizations, so basically half, said that the reforms were initiated within the organization. And then 22% said that the reforms were driven mainly by regulatory reforms at regional or national level. We've also looked at the answers to this question, but only to those organizations that earlier on had said that ACA processes were mainly developed at national level. And so this could be seen as a proxy for more centralized systems, like for example, Spain, Italy, or Poland. But even in these cases, so let's say even in more centralized systems, still organizations said that the reform was mainly initiated inside the organization, and then only 27 that it was mainly driven by regulatory reforms. And we're just highlighting this here because it seems that a little bit of irrespective of the centralization level, the initiative or the individual initiative of organizations seems to be quite relevant. So we've asked also institutions what were the main motivations for them to engage in these reforms. And again, you have them here from the most frequent to the less frequently mentioned. So the main motivation was about offering a more diversified and fair set of evaluation criteria. So in the sense that the changing academic landscape now encompasses a wider variety of academic staff, of topics and outputs, and assessment criteria need to adapt to these. And this process is demanded, they say, not just by the institutions themselves, but also by academics. And they've also mentioned the need to have more transparency in career progression criteria, and this to the benefit of both those being assessed and those assessing. They've mentioned the importance of guaranteeing high research quality, so establishing clear common guidelines to increase the quality of the research produced, and this by advancing openness, avoiding unfairness, and providing a platform for knowledge exchange. One of the motivations was also to embed open science principles. So open science is recognized as an important driver for reforms in some cases. Also considering the staff well-being. So reforming career assessment is seen as a means to promote well-being and equal opportunities in the workforce in organizations. It's also about making the organization an attractive employer, because some organizations say that establishing these reforms and these new criteria brings prestige to the institution and helps to attract talent. And finally, one of the motivations is also to align the institutional policy with what is being done at national or global level. Then we had a couple of questions on the internal actors, and we've asked organizations to identify who were the main actors involved in initiating the reforms. And here they identified the organizational leadership and research management as the most frequently groups identified in initiating reforms. And in terms of resistance to reforms, we had the same question. So who are the main internal actors that are perceived to resist reforms? We had about 40% of organizations saying that there was no resistance in the organization. This could be due to our sample, because we're only including here organizations that are doing some type of reform. So if we had a larger sample and more diversified, this could be different. But for those then that did identify some groups that showed more resistance, they said that senior academics and mid-career academics were those displaying a little bit more resistance. And this is the perception, again, of those replying to the survey, which in most cases were those people that tended to be in a high-level leadership positions. So we've also looked into the reasons. The respondents said that senior academics appeared to show more resistance, and you have the main reasons identified here. These also apply for mid-career researchers, so the reasons for both groups are the same. So they say that there is resistance to change. So there's reluctance to change what is already being done, because there's comfort with familiar routines. There's some skepticism towards new approaches, and the lack of clarity about how new systems will impact individual careers and research quality. There's also some uncertainty about qualitative methods. So doubts about the objectivity, effectiveness of qualitative evaluation criteria, fear that these methods may be less predictable, harder to compare across disciplines. There's also some preference for quantitative measures. So because this is very ingrained in academia, there's a tendency to favor easily quantifiable metrics and a preference for the apparent comparable nature of quantitative data. They've also mentioned the lack of understanding of change. So this is about insufficient awareness or comprehension about the reasons and the benefits that reforms can bring, and also increased with or concerns with increased workload, especially additional administrative tasks, times, and resource also needed to adapt to new methods. So in terms of the role of academic staff in the reform process, for the majority of these organizations, academic staff or their representatives, they are actively involved in the discussions on reform and in developing new processes, or at least they are, that's what you have here in light green, at least they are consulted on these processes. So it's relatively rare, let's say, that academic staff are not at all involved on these processes. So we've asked organizations about what did they expect to happen from the reform, if they expected more positive or negative results. And as you can see here, for the vast majority of respondents, they expect positive results in a variety of areas, especially on the careers of academic staff, quality and impact of research, and attractiveness of the organization. And they also expect that after the reform, the focus of academic career assessment will be on a balanced use of qualitative assessment and metrics. We had a few additional questions about the activities considered in academic career assessment, and here we asked organizations 2 questions. So first, what is the importance of these areas in the current system or before the reform is implemented, and what do they expect to happen after the reform is implemented? So currently, as you can see here, research is the most important area, followed by education. Then the other areas that you have here in the chart, they are either moderately important or showing low importance. And overall, what is expected is that after the reform, research will continue to be very important, but all the other areas are expected to increase in importance. So some more than others, but that is the overall result. So it's not that the other areas will become more important at the expense of research, but it is that research continues to be important together with other areas. We had a similar question to this one, but rather than using these more general activities, we provided organizations with different indicators that can be used to assess academic careers. And we've asked them again the same question. So what is the current importance of these indicators and what do they expect to happen after the reform? And so currently, and with no surprises, so these indicators here, so more related to research, namely publications and metrics, they are perceived as the most important. And the other areas are either moderately important or not important. And what is expected to happen after the reform is that overall, for these other indicators such as collaboration, student satisfaction, open science, for example, they are expected overall to become more important. And the research indicators here, they expect a drop in importance. So this is the same chart, just to highlight here that metrics are expected to become less important, as well as publications. Acquisition of funding kind of stays the same. And the largest important increase after the reform is expected for open education materials, open science, and science communication. But the message here is the same as for the previous chart, is that research continues to be important, but not so much metrics, but all the other areas will or are expected to gain in importance. So finally, to conclude our presentation, towards the end of the survey, we've also asked organizations what are the main achievements so far in their reform processes. Of course, many mentioned that because they were just starting, it's not yet possible to assess the effects of the reform. But for those that identified some achievements, most of them included the raising awareness and initial engagement in the reform. And this is about involving different stakeholders in the organization to build consensus on assessment criteria and procedures, and raising awareness about the benefits of reform. This is also about aligning their own reform efforts in the institution with those at national and international levels, ensuring that the assessment criteria are transparent and fair so that academic staff clearly understand expectations for career progression. They've also mentioned that they have improved in their career support and recognizing diverse career paths. So enhancing career development for academic staff through training, mentoring, or funding opportunities, and also valuing and rewarding various forms of scholarly work beyond the traditional research outputs. They've also mentioned that this is about improving assessment practices. So in some cases, they have already developed discipline-specific criteria to recognize the unique contributions of different fields, shifting towards more qualitative methods, and also a push to adopt more open science principles. And finally, organizations also mentioned that they've had a chance to reflect on the change process, to evaluate the complexities of academic assessment, reform, and methods. And some of them also say that these reforms have resulted in improvements in their own academic activities, for example, increased research output or enhanced teaching quality. So I will end the presentation here, but before handing over to Pastora, just to say that as I've said in the beginning, we're still analyzing some of the survey data, and this will be then published together with the lessons learned and case studies later on this year after the summer. So Pastora, I hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Rita. Thank you very much for this nice overview. And let me also thank all the working group members who contribute to the design of the survey, also to the case studies, and are there now analyzing all the data you've just shown us. So we'll do the same thing as we did previously, but now we'll give the floor to Maria first. So Maria, reactions on the survey results.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing the very interesting survey results with us. I would like to make a few points related to the findings. So I appreciate that the respondents have openly discussed also the challenges within the process and so on. So first, it is clear that there are problems with the current way researchers are assessed. For example, many institutions have relied too heavily on publication metrics. So it is encouraging to see that survey respondents plan to give more weight to diverse contributions, such as outreach and open science activities, and that the collaborative elements like peer reviewing work are gaining more recognition. I think these kinds of changes might even increase the attractiveness of academic careers for younger people, as the image of researcher as a paper-making machine is not that attractive. However, assessing these kinds of contributions responsibly, especially at the individual level, can be challenging, and I'm sure you know that already. So CoARA emphasizes that we should prioritize qualitative assessment when assessing research and other contributions. And whereas quantitative indicators have their problems, their strength is perhaps that they are often less ambiguous to interpret than qualitative ones. So one concern I have heard is that subjectivity may increase with the use of qualitative judgment, especially if the criteria are not clearly and transparently defined beforehand. This concern was also raised among the survey responses. So while it may be clear what measures should not be used, it is not always clear what should replace them. So we should provide the people doing assessments responsible alternatives for assessing academic contributions. Well, my second point also relates to the diversity of assessment criteria. I think that at universities, research should continue to be in focus in assessments, even if the weight of research metrics was diminished. So researchers in general want to be assessed based on the research they have conducted. So while broadening the criteria is important, contributions to research should still be central in assessments. So I was happy to see that in the survey results that the other areas will not drive over research contributions. My third point is that assessments should better consider that researchers have different opportunities to engage in certain activities. For example, it was brought up in the Finnish survey we conducted that non-native researchers who do not master the local language may find it difficult to engage with societal stakeholders and citizens. Another example is the assessment of contributions in open science. So researchers from all backgrounds may not have had the needed support structures to publish openly or to open research data. So I think it is important to somehow consider also the working conditions of researchers in assessments, and to consider what intended and non-intended effects changes in assessments may have. So the fourth and final point is that while policies articulate intentions, actions are, of course, what matter. So sometimes policies do not aim to drive action, but rather serve as more kind of symbolic statements. So the academic community is, of course, interested in the tangible outcomes of the reform. So it will be very interesting to see how the policy plans described in the survey translate into concrete actions. One concern I have relates to the work overload within university administrations. This can pose some challenges when universities allocate resources to the change processes. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Maria, for your comments and also remarks. Ginny, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. So yeah, again, I just wanted to say I thought it was great to see the survey, great to see the diversity of countries and organisations. I'm sorry we didn't get more from Australia. We'll do it better next time. I will note, I mean, obviously this captured well input from CoARA members. It was good to see there was also indication of support from some of the respondents. And I think that, as I said before, I think we should consider the various initiatives as being complementary. I would really reinforce Maria's points from her previous comments and from just now about the importance that signing up to any of these initiatives is not just done as window dressing. My reflection of that quite often is that for a number of organisations, unless there are very specific tools or actions they can address, they may not be able to identify a way forward after taking the initial step of signing up to something. And I know from my own experience of going through this at my own institution, getting that initial step to actually sign something was massive in itself. So it reinforces the need for tools and examples and kind of practical ways forward. In the 82% of organisations who had begun the process on reforming academic career assessment, it was interesting to see that it was primarily at the organisational level and less so at the departmental level. This doesn't surprise me because, again, I think, just to reinforce Maria's point, this may well be around capacity. And I think that one of the things I have heard from organisations or people who try to implement change at a departmental level, that they may well end up having that change blocked at the institutional level if there's not buy-in there. So doing change at a departmental level can be, potentially rather a sort of challenging thing to do. I was very struck by one of the answers to the survey that the complexity of the current system was a challenge, and I would absolutely agree with that. It's often, we often hear that at DORA, and I hear that with other people that I talk to, that complexity can just lead to paralysis. People don't know where to start. So again, reinforces the need for specific examples of how to move forward. In the slide where Rita talked about the biggest driver of reform being from within the organisation and not a regulatory approach, I suspect that you might see a difference if other countries were asked about that. But I do feel that change coming from within an organisation is likely to be longer term than one that is simply driven by regulatory change from outside. The idea that there's a main driver is a more diverse and a fairer system of assessment also kind of gives me hope that this is actually driven from the culture within an organisation. And in the end, we know that the culture is critically important for making long-term changes. It's not terribly surprising to see that change was largely driven by organisational leadership. One thing I have observed is that It's incredibly important to have a champion at the top of an organisation to move forward a change like this. The challenge and the sort of peril is if that person moves on. And so one of the things that I think is very important is to get hold of institution buy-in as soon as possible. Otherwise, if you lose your champion, then reform may kind of stall. I'm not too surprised to see the resistance from senior academics. I think that some of what we're seeing here is simply a generational change, and that we're already seeing that generational change. So I think we just have to accept that's the case. Finally, I was just going to say, again, the fact that academics are actively participating is another point that gives me great hope for the future. I feel that for a long time, a lot of these conversations have happened in sort of professional space and somewhat in the higher institutional, higher end of organisations. When researchers put their minds to it, I think that we will actually see a sort of long-term change, and that is fantastic. The idea that there are high expectations of the reform, so again, holding everybody to account, I think again gives us the opportunity to make sure that this is long term. And I'll just finally end, because there's one thing I think that is really interesting in all of this is the idea that this kind of research reform assessment makes the organisation more attractive to academic staff. I have a very direct quote of that. The University of Melbourne, which has led work on research assessment in Australia. They've signed DORA. They've been very active in a number of different ways. I actually heard a quote from an academic when they first initiated this piece of work, and they said, "The organisation finally sees me as more than my numbers." And I kind of feel that that is exactly what we're trying to achieve here. And it gave me a lot of hope to see that reflected in the results of this survey. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jeannie. And yeah, hopefully we're moving on that direction, right? Seeing us more than numbers in an academic system. So thank you very much to you both for your comments and reactions. That's currently a very nice